All right, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Who knows what the time zone is? My guest, I suppose I'll be moderating today, is Andy Fallshaw. Andy, what time is it there, brother?
4:15 a.m.
Good man, good man. For those who don't know, Andy is the founder of Bellroy, a fantastic maker of super high quality products that's based in Melbourne. He has also become a friend of mine over the years. My name is Peter Daring. I started a company called Peak Design. We make products that are both in the same space as Andy, but also in the photographic market. And in the later years of our relationship, Andy and I have come to realize that we share a lot of similar thinking, a lot of similar background, and definitely a lot of similar care and sort of cognizance of being manufacturers of goods in the world. We both are charged with making, in some senses, as many of the products that we can that people will buy and getting them out into the world. And we're also very cognizant of the environmental impacts of that. And I think that's, at least in part, what has drawn us together here today, Andy.
A great summary, thank you. And I think similarities even beyond. I think we're both product geeks, but I think we're both also future geeks in some sense of like, how can we create more vibrant futures? How can we solve some of the world's most pressing problems or make a tiny, tiny little contribution towards that? And even how do you understand what the problems are? So I think there's many good, fun things that we both love to geek out on.
That's right. And I think maybe fortunately for the crowd today, I think optimism is something that runs in our veins about this future. I really do believe that our future is very bright. I think that there's a lot of talk about it not being the case, but I don't know. I look at the longer arc of our time and I see, frankly, nothing but improvement. And that's even in the face of some obvious massive challenges we've got that we're here to talk about today. But I share that, and I think you do too, Andy.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting watching that optimism is countered by so much hard work you put in to changing that and being a part of that and seeing how you can help actually bring more of that sort of positivity to the space and make real change. So it's not a sit back, everything's fine optimism, we're going to be right. It's going to take a lot of work, but we can do it.
Fortunately, the work is fun, at least in my opinion. So I think, though, we're not here to just talk about the things that we share in common and the similarities, but also a little bit of a difference in philosophy that I think is going to be interesting to push and pull on a bit here. The title of this this session is called Spending on Sustainability, Where to Invest and Why. And that is because Andy and I have some different approaches to our philanthropic dollars of both our organizations. I'll briefly state kind of where the opinion that I have come to hold vis-a-vis sustainability dollars. I find plastics in the ocean distasteful. I find mining of materials to look like an ugly scar upon the earth, and landfills are gross to look at as well. But these are not problems that are existential for this planet, in my opinion. In my view, it all ladders up to carbon. The potential loss for biodiversity, the unknown effects that are going to occur through climate change, it all has to do with there are too many parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases. The warming that is likely to occur to this Earth is just simply going to bring about an order of magnitude change that we haven't been presented with before. So given that, it makes me believe that every single dollar that you can afford to spend as a company or as an individual or as a government, most crucially, ought to be spent on mitigating carbon. And any dollar not spent in that direction is one that's being taken away from the fight for carbon. And it's a belief that I've come to hold fairly strongly. And Andy, I think, has a different approach, and yet he's a guy whose thinking I deeply respect. So go ahead, Andy. How do you see it?
I am so grateful that there are people like yourself so focused on some of the biggest interventions and levers that we know of. I think you're right though. I'm trying to hold more things because a lot of the work we've done, we work a lot with a movement called effective altruism, and in that movement, it's essentially a movement that I guess folks like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have a sense of what it looks like in action, which is the head and the heart trying to work together to solve the world's biggest problems, or at least improve the trajectory of them. And in that, I'm going to jump straight in with a framework, sorry, but in that they have 4 key lenses that they assess opportunities through. Importance, like, is it a real thing? Is it a big thing? Does it scale? How significant is it? They look at tractability, like, can we get traction on this? Do we know what it looks like? Can we see change? Neglectedness, which is a really important one. So how many dollars are working on this? How many minds working on this? Organizations? How much discussions happening around this? Do we have roadmaps for what improvement looks like yet? And then the fourth is personal fit. So importance, tractability, neglectedness, personal fit. And personal fit's such an interesting one. It came later in the movement. And it was essentially saying when you work on things you don't care about, it's pretty hard to do amazing work. But it's also looking at things like comparative advantage, and where do we each have a comparative advantage? And so when I look out at the world and everything we've got to do to start to improve it, I think it's brilliant when we have carbon experts working in the world who really understand big mechanisms. They understand how to do carbon trading and what that looks like. They understand the physics of how different layers of our atmosphere actually interact and what they do. That it's so good. And then it's an area that, for me personally, I have an understanding, engineer by training, but it's no way am I as good in that space as I am in some other spaces. And there's some of those spaces that I know are quite neglected. There's some of those spaces that I suspect will become incredibly important in the near future, even though they aren't as important right now. And so in that conversation space, it is, I love when the world gets these big lever movers like yourself that go, all right, it's one thing, it's deep, let's go at it. But I also know that when you're playing with big levers, things change quickly. Like, we can see the impact of humans on the planet. It's significant. We can see the impact of certain things on the planet, like Milton Friedman's, the sole purpose of a business is to maximize shareholder return. That was an idea that became such a big lever that it changed enormous behaviors, billions of dollars of spend. And when you have those rapid changes, the big lever changes in complex systems, a lot of other stuff starts going wrong that you've then got to do. And so a lot of my own personal approach is around, how do you understand complex systems? How do you create coordination so that really good minds and teams and funds can work together to solve both the largest current problems as well as the near-term emergent problems, as well as the systems that will let all of these things keep readjusting and rebalancing in a stronger emergent system. So it can sound so washy, big lever where it's like it's one thing, it's go. But what I really love is when we have several incredible organizations, minds, people working on those biggest levers. And then we have others saying, but how do they all interact? How are we going to measure what's happening? How do we move measurement into shorter and shorter timeframes that becomes more actionable? How do we spot the other problems that are emerging? So we still choose certain things to go hard at. We still choose, we do a lot of work in animal welfare. There's billions of factory farmed animals that are living just horrific lives that we can see we're getting incredible traction. We can see some of the groups working, even just in the US. The results over the last 6 years for factory farm chickens. It sounds like a small thing, but this is billions of lives, and they've radically improved conditions for many at a percentage that has moved from, I think, 2% cage-free chickens to 15% cage-free in the US over the last 5 to 6 years. So it's like, that's an example of another problem. It's just chickens, but it's like, that's billions of lives being lived in horrible conditions that are now slightly better than they were. So a lot of my approach is around, what are all the ways these problems interweave and wind, and how do we create systems that let us find resources and minds and funds to work on these in a system where we all get better at recognizing problems and working on them together, and many things move up together.
Man,
did that sound convincing to you?
It does, actually. And would you do, I think myself and the audience, the 4 aspects of that framework, they hit with me, even though remind me, tractability, and that was the second or third. Go ahead.
Yeah, so importance is always worth putting at the front. And early on, teams were calling that scalability and things, but it's like, no, that's not enough. Importance. Like, okay, is it something that makes a real difference to lived lives, whether they're, or the systems that support those?
Okay. So it was importance.
Tractability.
Yep.
Neglectedness. And personal fit. And personal fit can apply to a brand.
Sure.
Peak and Bellroy are 2 different brands that we do play in very similar spaces, but there's a different feel to each brand. And the things we do, some will resonate more with Peak than they would with Bellroy. So it even applies at brand and organizational
Andy, you use
level.
more leather. We use more carbon fiber. So naturally, my fixation's on carbon. Carbon fiber is although you may be locking up a little bit of carbon there, it is unfortunately a more carbon-intensive process, and that's the thing that matters. But those things really hit home for me, and actually what it made me realize is that the reason that I'm so focused on carbon is because all of those things, importance, tractability, neglectedness, I'll get to that, and then personal fit are just squarely, like, this is why climate neutral came to me, it didn't, not the other way around. And why I've come to hold this philosophy that all companies should offset the carbon that they cannot reduce. That is another way of saying that they should pay for their pollution. And that's why, like, it's so tied to economics and where you spend your dollars, and really aspects of responsibility and what businesses should be doing in a world where we know with certainty that every additional molecule of carbon into the atmosphere is bad news. It's going to result in more cost down the road. And we have good numbers around that. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And just to poke at that, I think at the moment, if your job is to get vaccines into the world right now, it's like carbon offsetting right now for a company making vaccines probably isn't the highest leverage activity they can be doing.
Touché.
And so it is the conviction and the power is what will be needed to move massive amounts of dollar and spend. And so it's a really important trait and aspect to have. And then there will still be companies that, for the moment, they're working in an area that if they're focused on that's dollars they don't have to solve this thing that they are particularly well suited to solve in an area that will then allow other things to start happening.
This is an excellent point.
Just to be a little crunchy.
It's unfortunate you've kind of taken the legs out from under me with just excellent points here, Andy. That definitely there is a different place, and it's for different reasons. I think what's interesting about carbon is that it's a problem we've spent the last 200 years getting ourselves into, and getting into it very deeply. And the solution is not something we get to do in a year. It's not. It's for the next 30 years, and of course beyond that, but the next 30 years are the really critical ones where we have to literally we have to we have to electrify everything, which is extremely complicated because we need so much more electrical infrastructure to do this. We need new technologies for cement and steel making. We need to really consider things like electric-powered nuclear freighters if we want to keep having goods move throughout the world. But like it is going to have an upfront additional cost. We need to be willing to pay for that, and I want there to be an expectation that a certain component of business dollars head toward that effort, because right now it is. I think there's always been a tendency to blame BP and Shell and Chevron and Exxon for the problems that we have in the world. But frankly, they've just been meeting the demand that businesses like mine and yours and Patagonia and Whole Foods and Walmart have been creating, right? And that is all, frankly, up to us as individuals. There's this interesting push-pull between individual responsibility and corporate responsibility. And I feel like in a lot of environmental circles, we're like, we shouldn't be looking at ourselves. We should be, it's all the oil company's fault. And I don't know. I certainly the oil companies have all sorts of things that they are culpable for over the years, but they've just been acting as part of a system. And they have been giving us products that are incredible. Roads and airplanes and hospitals and bridges and computers and everything good that we rely on. Everything good that we rely on that is material is a function of fossil fuels. And I think that people are so quick to shun these companies and give them the finger and say, like, you dirty bastards, you're responsible for the destruction of the earth. And I know that if I were one of the engineers who worked hard to dig up fossil fuels and provide very cheap energy for the world, my feelings would be hurt. They really would. And you know what? That matters. It matters how we on the left, or, well, I'm assuming that that's basically who's here. It matters that we are acting empathetically toward other individuals who see that the work they have done has brought good into the world. And when they're told that they're pieces of shit for it, it's just like, you're not going to get anywhere. That's not a right way to have a conversation. So,
I think what you're saying is pushing right at one of the most important things. There you go. I'm tempering again. Damn it. No. So I think you're spot on. And as we look around the world, I think we also have to understand the roles of the economies that we sit within. So I think, for instance, one of the most horrible things would be if we said, okay, fossil fuels gave us a leg up on productivity and energy extraction in a way that is, unprecedented. It's like millions of years of activity to generate these incredibly high energy materials that can be unleashed for all sorts of things. And it's like, we can't now say, okay, across the world, ban that. Everyone has to go to what's currently more expensive versions of solar conversions, electrical power, those sorts of things. Because for something like emerging economies that are still really early in their journey, if they have access to some of these things, it's going to be pretty hard to say, no, you can't use this material that costs cents for the joule. You have to use this one that costs dollars for the joule of power, Mm-hmm. So I think this comes back to what is the right place. And I think especially in economies that have already had the benefit of, what's now a couple of 100 years of sort of really learning to extract fossil fuels in a very apparently productive and efficient way. Mm-hmm. It's like that on-ramp to, economies where everyone can have health and medicine and, gets to have light and power at the flick of a switch. Our next challenge is to say, but if we've already met our basic kind of material needs, it's like, who are the people that now can take on a little extra burden? They can start to say, well, we never measured the pollution we were doing because it felt like you pump it into the sky and it all disappears. And what felt like an abundant system where you could just keep throwing it in, all of a sudden we've discovered that's a scarce system. You know, we're hitting the edges of it and it's now bouncing back and impacting us significantly. So it's like, who are the people that can sustain a little extra inefficiency because it's a new technology, it's more expensive, it doesn't yet have the economies of scale. It's like, part of what we need to do is say, who can sustain that sort of pioneer work and pay a little extra for things? Who can start to pioneer how the hell we're going to measure this and start to say, well, we can measure like physical effluent. Like, you know, we come out of a world of leather tanning as well. And so they were some of the first toxic waste producers. But when you're dealing with liquids, it's much easier to measure. And so we could start to impose environmental regulations that say, no, this felt like you were pushing it over and it disappeared. It's not. We can measure it. We can step it back. You need to pay extra to actually treat it and return those waters to a reasonable state where they won't go downstream and pollute and do all these things. We're now starting to reach that with the less tangible things, the harder to measure things like air pollution. But we can now measure this. And so now the job is to start moving that back and bringing accountability for that and saying that system that felt abundant, like you could just throw whatever you wanted into it and it disappeared. It's not. We now need to start coming back. And so it really is trying to understand who's most able to absorb that early work that does feel harder. You know, you don't make more return to shareholder dividend when you start actually paying for the pollution you're making and the cleanup of that pollution.
Right.
But which economies can start to say, but it's time we did that because billions are suffering for it. So which economies can do that? Which companies can do that? Which companies can have consumers that will actually identify what they're doing and reward them for it in some way? For instance, a lot of startups will want to start donating. Oh, sorry. This is a very small chamber to say many startups in the sorts of folks involved in these conferences will want to start donating on day one to causes to make the world better. And it's like, one of the questions is, are you doing what, like when you donate to offset carbon, it's actually really just saying, I'm going to skip ahead here and do what's right, not what I can get away with. And so I think it's a fascinating one because in 10, 20, 50 years, surely we'll be measuring that. Surely governments will regulate that you actually have to offset the pollution, you know, the problems you're pushing into the world. So that's just something that, yeah, sure, I could get away with it, but I could probably get away with shoplifting that bit of food, and I could probably get away with doing a bunch of other nasty things. And I'm just not the sort of person or company that wants to do that. So some of that's bringing that back to that self-accountability as a person, as an organization, as a brand or a business. And then that feels like something that even when companies are starting out, even when they're not yet profitable, that feels like something that you should be saying, hey, we really need to do something like that quite early. And then if it's something like, you know, early in our days, we were giving a huge amount of money for essentially insecticide impregnated bed nets to reduce malarial transmission, right? So it was interesting. We felt we could do that once the business was profitable. But before it was profitable, it was something not related to the business. And so it's a harder thing to do. And like often when businesses aren't yet profitable, it's almost, you could put an argument that you're better off doing the things that you're only getting away with because regulations are lagging. Sort of start focused on that and then start focusing on, and then where can we build some real comparative advantage to actually start moving things forward, not just catching up with our lag. Sorry, that was a little of a ramble, but
well,
I think I was trying to find something interesting there.
I mean, part of it was a hell of a pitch for climate neutral, which not sure if that was purposeful or accidental, but it was great. But also, I do think that the mosquito nets are particularly interesting, right? I've heard some talks on this in that they're, at least at one time in the world, and maybe even currently today, like if you're concerned about human suffering, the most efficient dollars that you can spend by a long shot are mosquito nets.
And just to put figures to that, about $3.50 US can purchase a net into a underdeveloped economy. That net, typically a couple of kids sleep under it. And the best figures, and this is pretty good because there's been very rigorous research, is for about $3,500 to $4,000 US. Once you've distributed that many nets, you're pretty certain you've saved a child's life. So that's a pretty good ROI by anyone's measure.
It is, and it kind of begs the question: how come that hasn't been depleted? Meaning, like, obviously, it should.
The neglectedness question.
It should tail off, right? That neglectedness question, like, holy shit, that's a bargain, right?
It's a bargain.
If you care about human suffering. And it is wild that we haven't just flooded the world with these things to the point where your dollars can no longer really be that effective in that space. But
it's interesting, you and I have spoken about this with carbon credits a little bit. It used to be cheaper to save a life. Mm-hmm. That figure used to be about $1,500, then about $2,500. Now it's moving up more to sort of $4,000 space. And that is spectacular. That is such good news. It is. And it really is. That's a sign of that when you're starting to counter that neglectedness lens. And so carbon credits will go through this same thing. There's some dead obvious things we can do that are incredibly cheap interventions to start to soak up some carbon. And so there's still some pretty good value carbon credits available in that way. And our hope is actually almost that carbon credits become more expensive until you get those game-changing technologies that as it grows, so just like solar panels, once there's enough dollars being put into it, the price comes down. And so you then play this fascinating cat and mouse game.
That's right.
Of how do you get the technologies that then unlock the next affordability surge.
And solar had this very obvious benefit to it, right? Like you can generate a kilowatt hour and you can charge money for it, and it's a known rate. And so there was always this revenue stream attached to it. But for the longest time, there has been no revenue stream attached to mitigating a ton of carbon. And this is, to me, why investing in offsets is such a critical need for us to wean ourselves off of carbon. We need to show that there is an economy for those who are willing to put effort into investing things. Into mitigating carbon. People have criticized buying carbon offsets on the premise that you shouldn't pay someone else to mitigate your carbon footprint. You should be reducing it on your own. Like, that is the one true path. First off, I think that's just incredibly ignorant of how complex supply chains are and what it actually means to reduce a carbon footprint. I don't think that people get it. The tripod behind me is one of the products we make. It has 340 parts in it. I shudder to think how many factories and actual sites, be it the mining of bauxite in your country, probably in Australia, and to its refinement and its shipment all around the world. We can't reduce the carbon footprint of a mining company. That means we need their vehicles to be electric. It means that we need Western Australia to be fully producing its energy from not the coal that it digs out of the ground there, but out of solar. Like, it is an incredibly complex thing. So peak design, reducing the carbon footprint of that, save for transitioning to recycled aluminum, we can't do that. We have no capacity to do that. And furthermore, why would we not pay someone else to help mitigate our carbon footprint? We pay other companies to do nearly everything for us.
And it's fascinating. Carbon's one of the most globalizable commodities in a way of, it doesn't matter if it's being pumped into the atmosphere in India, in Bangladesh, in Myanmar, or in Australia, it all mixes.
It
So
totally
it's
all
an
mixes.
especially good one to say, can you get economies of scale? Can you find regions that can specialize in mangrove swamps? Can you work with regenerative farmers in the areas where regenerative farming can reach profitability much earlier, and then find a way to additionally credit the carbon that those soils are soaking up? It's a spectacular place to be really working on offsetting rather than reducing. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, like, and it's not to criticize reduction. It's just to be realistic about it. It's just to be realistic about it. And I hope that the argument disappears that it is somehow immoral to pay someone else to do it. Is it immoral to pay another company to take our trash out? Is it immoral to pay another company to sail the boats that ship our products around? No, it's not. Like, we're experts at a very narrow set of things: designing shit and marketing shit. That's what we're good at. We're not good at anything else. And so if you expect us to be good at reducing a carbon footprint, when actually what that involves is like incredibly transformation of agrarian economies and deep technology and electrical infrastructure, like, we can't be good at that. We're just hanging on, trying to design products and market them. So we've got to stop assuming that businesses should be on their own volition reducing their footprint down to zero. It's a worldwide effort. I feel strongly about
that. But it comes down to this, like, the system, right? And is the system got holes? Does it have areas of opportunity? How do you build it? And you're exactly right. Like, work out what you can be spectacular at. Work out how you can reduce any external harm that has, and then how you can start to move your whole part of the world or the ecosystem or whatever it is forwards, and then plug in and work with a whole series of others that are working in their areas of expertise. And I mean, it's interesting though, you then need a really good way to measure carbon. You need a way to measure carbon offsets. You need to start working in policy to start to say, I know we used to be able to pump this in the atmosphere, so we never had regulations around this, but we now need them. I come from a country that's interesting. Australia actually had a reasonably progressive leader many years ago who started a carbon trading scheme and did it all in. And another group realized that they could win political points tearing that down. They did, and now it's considered the poison chalice. Like, anyone who goes near this is going to lose an election, and that's just the established political issue. So Australia was right at the spearhead of it. Some players that don't have the same values as you and I decided they could get elected around this, tore it down. Australia's going to be a hard one to get carbon trading scheme across the line in. But there's now a whole bunch of other countries and economies that have this opportunity. The world's more ready for it. Our measurement systems are better. Our kind of cross-border trading systems are better. It's going to get to the point where certain economies won't work with you unless you do this. All of a sudden, we can see that a multi-nuanced approach to some working in policy, trying to move that ahead, some working in the technology for carbon capture, some working in the measurement. All of those things need to be happening. The coordination needs to be happening to get this across the line earlier, faster, with the people that can afford it, and then you start spreading it out from there.
I might say, Andy, it seems to me that Australia's opinion might change when a certain generation probably moves to the Great Barrier.
We don't have time. So this is one, like, kids are our future, all this shit. Nah, we can do it all. Like, the adults in the room can already do all this shit.
I know.
Let's just find a way to do it.
I know we can, but this is why, I mean, the same problems exist in the United States, of course, and half of the reason why I co-founded Climate Neutral is because we can't seem to get governments to do it, but the next biggest kind of grouping organizationally is companies. And companies are more nimble than governments, at least, right? So I think it's a good place to apply leverage. And when governments look around and see that companies are doing this, they might see that like, okay, they're ready, you know? And that might happen in concert with certain, you know, like there's an older generation that it's still interesting to me. I feel like climate change denial is churning, as you knew that it would, from denial that it exists to like, okay, we get that it exists, but humans aren't the cause. Okay, humans are the cause, but the problems aren't worth, you know, you're exacerbating what or exaggerating what the problems are going to be. Like the anti-climate change rhetoric is going to continue to move toward reality over time. And it is just a question of how quickly we can make it happen.
I agree. And back to that focus you have on like the big lever. What's the big lever? I think it's even been fascinating seeing the role that business can play in influencing government. So, you know, in Australia, Mike Cannon-Brookes is one of the Atlassian co-founders. So Australia doesn't have the tech scene US does, but we have a few beautiful examples of tech companies that have gone to a massive global scale. And just seeing the pressure he puts on politicians because he's, you know, helped create a company that's employing enormous numbers of people that are making software that helps companies manage projects more effectively. But then taking that platform to start to say to politicians, we're going to sway public opinion here. If you're not on board, it's going to hurt you. Seeing the ability for like governments want to deal with some big businesses that can represent big dollars, big employment heads, that sort of thing. And if those big businesses start to actually say, yeah, all right, we have to do this thing, all of a sudden it forces it into the politicians much more. I mean, solar and energy is a fascinating one right now. Australia still has a government that has been investing in fossil fuel projects. And right now they're being written off so quickly. Things that were promised to have a 30-year productive lifespan, as the cost of renewable energy has plummeted, it's now meaning they're going, oh, that 50-year project's now 40, 30, 20. We might be turning off this gas pipeline quite soon because it's no longer profitable to run it. Yeah. And it's like there's actually real abilities to combine the economic sense, to get people to just extrapolate a trend graph out. Like, just look at the cost of solar. It's a beautiful trend graph. It's not quite as good as Moore's Law running the other way, but it's pretty close. It doesn't take much imagination to look a few years into the future and say, yeah, you know, which horse am I going to back here?
And the energy companies are going to fight like hell. They have those are becoming stranded assets, right? All those petrochemicals.
And the good ones will pivot. They'll realize they're not in the fossil fuel game. They're in the energy provision game, and they can actually use that massive distribution. They can use the lobbying effectiveness. They can use all of these things to start to change their platform over. And some will and many won't. And I think it's the same with all of our businesses. We've got to keep saying it's not just what's making money today. It's what can continue to make it tomorrow with fewer of the negative issues, and it's backing better platforms. I'm also aware we probably have some absolutely fascinating people in the audience.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. If there are questions, feel free to come up on stage. We'll be happy to bring you up. I know people tend to get shy on these things. It's a little, it's hard.
And trying to keep that focus, spending on sustainability, where to invest in why. So I guess we've spoken quite generally about some movements. I think Peter and I do love just being able to have rigorous conversations around things and challenge each other on things. And I think each of us has kind of just updated our own maps of maybe how the world could get there sooner. through those conversations. So even if it's something where someone wants to poke a little bit at one of us, that would be fun as well.
That would be. We need a ringer in the audience to say, I thought carbon offsets were bullshit.
So while we're waiting for that to come, though, I mean, another one for me that I've seeing some of the work around regenerative agriculture at the moment. I mentioned it before, but it's an incredibly exciting space for me. And for me, that's carbon capture. That's foods that don't kill us, with all sorts of pesticide issues, breaking down our own biomes. It's all sorts of ways of reducing soil loss and improving waterways, some of the salinity issues in soils, all those sorts of things. So regen ag, I see, it's a form of solar. Plants are the original solar machines. How are you thinking about regen ag in the carbon capture space? Are you seeing any?
I mean, there was a time when I was like, oh my God, this is the one. This is the panacea. This is the silver bullet. Yep. And unfortunately, I think it's not that, but I do think it is one slice of the pie that is extremely important. And the reason where I went in my mind from like panacea to like, nope, it's that much of the pie, has to do with like everything about regenerative agriculture is fantastic. And let's imagine we turned all of the agriculture in the world into regenerative agriculture. Here is why it's no longer a panacea to me. Of all the photosynthesis that happens on the earth today, it's such an incredible thing, but it's only sucking down about 2 gigatons of carbon. And maybe if we successfully did regenerative agriculture everywhere, maybe that could become 4 gigatons, which is fantastic, but we're still putting 56 up into the sky right now. So you're solving less than 10% of the problem with that. Now, an 8% slice is very, very important, and we should pursue that with vigor, and carbon offsets are a way to make that happen. But we should be eyes wide open about the fact that just regenerative ag is not going to do it. And in fact, because it can only be maximum potential this much, well, you've really got to look at the other aspects of that 56, and a lot of that comes in stopping fossil fuel consumption, but you can't stop the economy. You have to build new electrical infrastructure. So that's what I think about.
Yeah, that's great. So I think it's much more like so much of regen ag is below soil, and we still don't understand the full ability of carbon capture below soil in all those microbes, all those root structures, all of the life form below. So that's good. It also then can radically reduce water consumption and usage, evaporation, those sorts of things. And in monocropping, those sorts of issues with pesticides, runoff, all of that, it then impacts ecosystems right down the line, including ourselves, human health, all those things. So I really agree. Anytime I hear there's one solution, and this is why it's always fun to poke with you, I just call bullshit. It's like there's never one solution. We live in incredibly complex, interwoven, ecosystems. There's so many things. And so I really agree. It's not the only solution. It's like one part of it. And I think we'll actually discover much more about how powerful it can be in what sorts of farming areas. Like, I think it's really good on the real variable land that can only be cropped, can't be cropped at the moment. It can only be livestock. I think we're still discovering a lot. And I completely agree. It's not the one solution. It's one part of that. I think once we understand the impacts of our current food production systems more fully, we'll actually realize that it's not just the carbon capture through photosynthesis, even just the carbon deposit below soil. It's also many of the downstream impacts and effects of it. But we now have some interesting things that we can check in the
Connie wants to. I think that's a great question from Connie. I love that we're getting some questions here. Yes. The finance community. I was listening to Kate Williams talk with Bank of the West and other banks, and I think it's fantastic that we see that there are financial organizations who are committed to no longer funding fossil fuel projects. I think that's extraordinary. To me, it does seem like one of those things where it only actually wins if everybody goes. Like we need their cost of capital to go up. And so long as there is another financial institution that's willing to come in there and fill that vacuum, I don't think it achieves what it's going for. But if enough financial institutions steer clear of fossil fuel investment, it could make a real difference. So,
it doesn't feel like that. Your response felt a touch more binary than I see it. Like I really do think, one of the reasons capitalism has spread as a system is it works in the nuance a lot. As soon as the cost of one thing gets slightly higher, people will find a substitute, and there's a lot of subtlety there. So I think even when it's only happening a little bit, it's already making a difference. Like the way economies interweave, it already makes a small difference. In Australia, we have compulsory superannuation where everyone has to commit. Basically employers put aside a percentage of everyone's salary. And then there's a very large super fund that's essentially guided by the government. And when that starts to move, this is like some of these Scandinavian investment funds. Mm-hmm. When that starts to move, you're moving gazillions of dollars very quickly. And I think just, again, that behavior of bringing a bit more accountability into the finance profession, into index funds are brilliant. They make a lot of sense. Warren Buffett speaks about them, but they invest in everything that meets your criteria of, size, scale, industry. If you start striking out some things, it will pop out, and all of a sudden that is much less investment. So I do think all of these subtle actions do, I'd be a little more optimistic than you. I think, when Tesla all of a sudden made the top, we do 200 in Oz. I think it was 100 for you guys. All of a sudden its share price jumped just because all of a sudden it's hitting all the index funds. If more people were doing some of the corporate social responsibility ESG index funds, that can be billions of dollars very quickly. Right. Even just with your own life savings or superannuation savings. So I'd say I'd be a little more optimistic that can change some things in the aggregate sooner than we realize.
I think that's very, very, very fair. Definitely, I'll cede that. Hey, Julie, I think you asked a great question. I think you should come up on stage so we can have a dialogue about it, because no one just wants to talk to us. It gets boring, There we go, Julie. All right. Look, the technology is amazing. Hi, Julie.
I love this.
Welcome.
So amazing. Thank you for inviting me up.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying your conversation, and I'm trying to make comments because I love the conversation, and I was just writing to you guys, how do we start a natural and human capital fund, right? Job creation and planting more trees. And I'm a big ambassador for sea trees. And I work for a film company, and our founder is actually in Africa filming one of Sea Trees' projects there, where they're planting 1 million sea trees in 18 months.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And there actually is a simple answer to your question of how do we do it? Money.
Correct.
And we need when there is money involved in it, people will do it. If there is a market that we create for planting sea trees, people say, I want to make some money, and they'll go do it. It's leveraging capitalism for that purpose. And so the money can come from one of two places. It can come from demand that businesses create, or it can come from the government. And if governments are going to continue to be slowpokes about it, then certain businesses are going to lead in this effort and say, you know what? We're Peak Design and we make tripods, or we're Bellroy and we make bags. But you know what? I'm going to buy some trees at the bottom of the sea in African waters. That sounds like a great idea. And I think that more companies are realizing that, I am contributory to this problem of climate change. And I have a difficult time. I see John is a climate neutral company, which is awesome, John. I'm very pumped on that. He's taken some efforts to reduce his shipping, but he's still going to have a lot of leftover carbon. And how is he going to take care of that?
100%.
And every single business on this planet is facing that. And they can either choose to ignore it and continue to put the negative externality in the air, or they can do something about it and they can pay for it. They can buy some trees.
And, companies like yours, it's, there's so many, on LinkedIn every day, another company's making a climate commitment by 2030, by 2040, by 2050. Okay. How about you go climate neutral today?
Yes.
While you're learning, because we don't have time.
Julie, I could not be any more with you. When people seek accolades for saying we're going to go carbon neutral in 2030, what is the freaking holdup?
Go do it today.
Yeah.
Do it today.
I think companies should be admonished for that.
Yeah, and I think consumers want it. Add it to your cart. Consumers are demanding it. Add it. Make your consumers pay for it when they buy your product. I don't know. That one
Absolutely.
really gets me every time, because the commitments can be made today.
Yes, they can. Thank you for bringing up. I think it's an excellent point. Andy, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I really agree on this action. So, so often you'll hear the 2050 commitment or something. And to be fair, there's times when you need to do it. So, McDonald's in Australia wanted to move away from caged eggs. If they had done that instantly, they would have consumed the entire free range production of Australia. So they can't do that instantly, right? And so there's certain large scale companies that do need a map. But I think too often it's like, we'll make a 2050 commitment and then in 2040, we'll make a 2080 commitment. And if we do this right, we're never really going to need to follow this through. So I find some of those forward commitments just a little bit of a slide out of the real action now. But I think the other thing I want to say, because just to make sure there's like a little bit of crunchiness in this, I think it's important that brands actually work out what their consumers value. So, we were giving a lot of money to bed nets, right? It was something we cared a lot about personally and did. And we realized that it was too hard a story to connect with Bellroy, which is a carry brand that makes bags, wallets, things to move through the world. We couldn't work out how to connect that. And so, like a lot of our other philanthropy, we moved that to our private giving, and we pivoted Bellroy to focus more on animal welfare. We realized there was an opportunity. We're in the leather supply chain. That's a freaking gross thing to talk about. It's a challenging thing to talk about with customers. It's like an animal has to die for our products. And then when you really get into it, you're like, well, actually, it's a byproduct of the meat industry, but we're still propping up the value of a hide. This is, it's maybe 10% of the value of a beast is in its hide. So then we had to say, all right, do we just eject and not use leather? Or do we get in and try and change the leather industry from the inside? And we ended up choosing to do that and help found Animal Welfare Group, which was under the Leatherworking Group, which is the largest environmental sustainability group in the leather industry. So all of a sudden we can sway the purchasing decisions of the biggest brands in the world using leather. So brands that many people will be wearing right now. We realized that we could actually get in and start to bring some accountability to animal welfare with people that were already caring about environmental sustainability. It's like, it's not that hard to move across to animal welfare from there. So I think it's still got to make sense for the brand or for the person. And that's that personal fit thing. I think it's, you still want it to have the large scale impact. You want it to be an important thing, neglected, tractable, all those things. But it's still got to make sense, because if a customer's not going to value it, it is hard to price the product up by that much. But if you can learn to tell the story, if you can learn to get people excited about it to the point where they will value it and it makes sense for your brand, then that's unreal. Go full steam ahead.
Yeah, that's an incredible journey. Thank you for sharing that. And it's not an easy journey, but makes so much.
None of this is easy.
No, that is not an easy journey. I hope in the future of your journey that vegan leather is on that research and development list.
We already have a whole series of things in that space. So
Awesome.
We've launched, there's a US-based company, Natural Fiber Welding, working in phenomenal plant-based leathers. We're the first company to get some of their product live and commercial and selling, and we're working with them. They're now getting dollars in from much bigger players than us. We have leather-free alternatives, again, because we can see a role for leather and we can see a role for something beyond leather, and we're trying to improve both. We're trying to work on both and then give the consumer the option. If there's something you care, like, do you want your bag from plants or do you want it from recycled water bottles? Both of those things are important problems, but we'll try and facilitate both and do a good job.
You know what I believe in vis-a-vis this issue is that we need technology to conspire to create a material that is better than leather. And
Absolutely.
The reason I say that, and we're doing that across the spectrum of sustainability issues, right? The electric car is a better car than the internal combustion engine. It is faster, it is quieter, it has so much torque off the line. It is fucking better in every way, and so it will win the day. And in the world of meat, right? I argue that a Beyond Burger right now, or an Impossible Burger, is roughly at parity taste-wise with a beef burger, and
100%.
that is super
better.
Exciting. I agree, it's better. I always buy them, but the reason I buy it is because, for me, I call it roughly at parity taste-wise, and then once it's at parity, great. I'm going to get the one that's more environmentally friendly, and I think that in the leather space, we're still working toward that. Peak Design uses a fraction of the leather, I think that Bellroy does, but we still choose leather because it is a better material. In part, it ages incredibly beautifully, and with that age means and beauty over time, that means people will keep it for longer, and they will cherish it more. And this is a critical component of sustainability. And the moment that a leather comes in that is better, a vegan leather that comes in that is objectively better than the leather we have, you will see the industry go whoop, like that. And that is what we need, that in all of these, in every aspect of technology that is going to green this planet, that's what we need, the better alternative.
I could not agree more. And it's like, as brand stewards, I feel that is our job, just as, the Tesla, like what that did to the rest of the automotive industry is phenomenal. Now everyone's saying they're going to banish internal combustion engines, they're going to change their ranges because they showed something better. And I completely agree. I think too often people wanting the sustainable option had to compromise on a performance aspect. We strive every day to say, how can we create something at least equal, preferably better, that starts to actually move the whole game towards more sustainable options. So I love it.
Andy, I am actually interviewing Rebecca Mink from Mink Shoes and Accessories on Friday on Clubhouse, and she's been doing the vegan leather thing for 20 years, which is kind of incredible.
It's wild. Right? And even we were slow into it because we didn't want to swap problems. Like, so many vegan leathers have come out of petroleum-based products.
Yeah.
So many of them don't have the longevity. They don't age gracefully. It's just starting to happen. There's still some issues, but there's a lot of excitement in the space. And, we're incredibly excited about some of the progress we're seeing.
If you want to join us in the conversation, I would love it. It's, of course, Pacific time. because
I
we're in
did
Los
have to
Angeles.
get up at 3:50 a.m. for this one. Sometimes the time zone throws me out a
Your
little.
rhythm is screwed up, Andy. Just roll with it, man. Join us over there. Speaking of time, I think. Well, actually,
Yes.
I'm
Thank you guys
unclear.
for inviting me up to speak, and really great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And thank you for both of your work.
Likewise, Julie. Take care. Thank you. Andy, are we getting the hook here at 11:15? I know it's been an hour, or do we go for another 15 minutes? I think it's.
I think we were meant to wrap up now. I'm sure Matt will poke us very shortly.
Yeah, Matt,
well.
join in there. We see you there in that little session, guys. You can keep going if you'd like. It's great, fantastic. I got nowhere to be. I know you don't have nowhere to be.
My house is still asleep, so
That's right. That's right.
It's kind of some fascinating topics there, and I think something I try and do anytime I hear a theory is I'm like, yeah, but what's the hard bit of it? What's the because if something's just obviously a great idea in every single aspect, surely it's been adopted. Like, what's the hard bit? And just having something like that, I really do think we want, as you say, we want vegan leathers to kick ass. And at the moment, you and I both agree that there's certain roles where leather is still just an incredible material. And so first, we're trying to reduce the negative impacts of leather coming out of it. Then we're trying to use it to steer the meat industry to better practices, which is a much bigger industry, so many more dollars. But then we're also trying to understand the role. So like monocropping, factory farming, they all have this thing of, it's just like, pretend you can strip out everything and just do this one tiny slice of the pie at a massive scale. And that will almost always break things. And, regenerative agriculture is fascinating because to really bring many farming areas to life, you need livestock. So you need to be rotating to sort of churn the soil. You need to be fertilizing. You need to be doing these sorts of things. And so what's the role of livestock? What happens with livestock in that regen ag area? I think a lot of these things, when you see good solutions that are genuinely good, they admit that there's some really hard things we still have to solve. And then they understand that it's not going to be just this one narrow thing at a massive scale, because once you introduce that, it throws everything else out a little. So that you've got to understand interdependencies. You've got to have a system. But anyway, that was me riffing. I think we've got someone.
We got John. John,
hello.
What's up, man?
Hey,
Or rather, it's John Eric.
it is.
Okay, where are you at, John? And what's your company? You joined Climate Neutral. I just would love to hear about what caused you to do that.
Yeah, so we're the Good Pencil Company. We are a Utah B Corp, and we've been a B Corp since the beginning, and signed up to become net zero 2030. And it was a start, and it was a great group to be a part of. But our friends at Mir talked about this new thing called Climate Neutral, and from the beginning, we wanted to get to net zero before 2030. That was always a goal of ours, but we wanted to at least make that commitment. And so joining Climate Neutral was that ability for us to get there before 2030. So
that's amazing.
It was great.
What is the Good Pencil Company, you said, right?
Yep.
Can I assume that this means you make pencils?
We do.
No way. First off, okay, have you seen the video, iPencil?
I've not. Someone else just talked about it today. It's based on a case study, I think, right?
In the 1950s, I think, exploring the supply chain of what it was like to bring a pencil into it. It's this glorious,
talking about
humbling
interdependencies, it is such a great example of interdependency.
Yeah. You're gonna check that out. You will enjoy it if you're in the pencil business. And holy shit, you're in the pencil business. That's amazing. You guys doing graphite? What are you guys doing for your writing source?
Yep. Yeah, we're just good old number 2 pencils. They're made here in the U.S. The wood is FSC certified. So we try to be as sustainable as we can. We also have a pencil without the metal back and the eraser. We use a natural rubber so that we can get rid of that waste. And there's my little one in the back. He always likes to jump in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have a compostable packaging, and during this year, where we've all had to reflect on what we're doing because of the pandemic and being at home.
Yep.
I was saying in the chat, we found a reusable shipping company that we work with called Books, and so they use a plastic shipper, and then at the end of life, they just chip it up into pieces and make a new shipper out of it. So
I love it.
I'm really excited to work with them as well.
That's very cool. There's certainly something in the water in Utah that is driving a really incredible thread of sustainability and entrepreneurship. I mean, I'd say per capita entrepreneurship happens in Utah. I see a Cotopaxi shirt you've got on there. It's cool to see, and it's interesting how it ends up concentrating in certain areas throughout the world. But
yeah,
and maybe it is because they're surrounded by so many incredible mountains and that appreciation for actually getting into this thing we call nature. And wouldn't it be nice if that hung around?
Yeah. Well, John, cool. Thanks for sharing a little bit about your story. That's awesome. And thank you for joining Climate Neutral. And congratulations. The big kid teeth will be coming in soon, I can tell.
Yeah. Thanks.
Take off as well. Great.
All right. Take care, John Eric.
Bye.
That's fun. See how fun it is, people in the audience? Come on, hanging out. Well, Andy, I think it's been a fantastic chat. It really
Thank you. Always love it. And always, I don't know, always love just like that wrestle. I never want to end up in a room where everyone's got the same opinions as me and, nothing happens. It's always great to have people with such similar values, but currently different maps of how to sort of bring those to life in the world. And that chance to wrestle and tease and try and ask a crunchier question or two and see if we can both leave with a slightly better guess at how to make the world better again, sort of thing.
I would hazard a guess that both you and I search for those opportunities specifically to not agree, because it's not that fun, not that interesting to agree. There's so much that we do agree upon. But Andy, as always, it's been a wonderful chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much to Sea Change Sessions for, again, facilitating these sorts of things. Thanks to everyone that's taken time out of their day to kind of think about these things and try and build their own plan for how to make a difference and make the world a little bit better. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. All right. Bye,
Cool.
Andy. Bye, Sea Change.
Bye.